Sagittarius. A message from your ancestors. You're breaking a chain they couldn't. Sagittarius, not all the weight you carry began with you. Some burdens are ancient. Some fears are inherited. Some patterns have lived in your bloodline for generations, silently passed from soul to soul, waiting for someone brave enough to say, "It ends with me." If you've ever felt like the odd one out in your family, if you've carried a sense of duty you couldn't quite name, if your path has been different, heavier, more spiritual, more painful, this message is for you. You are not lost. You are chosen. There is something deeply sacred about the work you are doing in this lifetime. You are not just healing your own wounds. You are unraveling the pain of those who came before you. Ancestors whose voices were silenced, whose dreams were buried, whose survival mattered more than their truth. And now you are here, waking up, refusing to repeat what broke them, daring to love in ways they couldn't, to speak what they swallowed, to forgive what they could not face. This is ancestral alchemy, and Sagittarius, whether you realize it or not, you are already doing it. In this video, I'll guide you through the spiritual signs, emotional truths, and soul contracts that mark you as a generational cycle breaker. If this resonates, if you've ever wondered why your path feels both lonely and divine, then I invite you to like, share, and subscribe, because this message was meant to find you, and your ancestors are watching with reverence. Date 1. The feeling of not belonging. Your soul chose to transform what others couldn't. Sagittarius, from the earliest days of your memory, there has been a soft but steady hum in your heart. I don't fit in here. Perhaps you didn't have the words for it back then. You only knew that you looked at the world, and often at your own family, with a quiet ache, a distance you couldn't quite bridge. While others followed the path that had been paved for them, you turned inward, upward, outward. You questioned what they accepted. You felt deeply where they numbed. You cried over things that didn't seem to move anyone else. And sometimes you were made to feel too much. But what if that very too much was your calling card? What if the fire in your chest, the one that made you restless and rebellious, was the spark that generations before you buried in silence? You weren't meant to repeat the pattern. You were meant to see it and break it. Many Sagittarius souls carry the spiritual imprint of what we call a cycle breaker. These are people who are born into lineages of trauma, silence, scarcity, shame, or suffering, and from a young age, they begin to question, rebel, and transform. They are the ones who choose therapy in a family that never spoke of feelings, the ones who travel far when everyone else stayed close, the ones who forgive what their ancestors passed down because they understand, even without being told. Let me tell you about a Sagittarius woman named Anya. She was born into a family where women stayed quiet and loyal, no matter how much it cost them. Her grandmother endured an emotionally abusive marriage for 42 years. Her mother never left a man who made her feel invisible. And Anya? She left her fiancé just 2 months before the wedding. Not because she didn't love him, but because she finally realized she was disappearing inside of someone else's expectations. The backlash from her family was swift. "Why can't you be normal?" they asked. "Why can't you be like us?" And for a while, Anya questioned herself. Until one night, she sat alone with an old photo of her grandmother and whispered, "Did I fail you?" And in the stillness that followed, she felt something shift. It was as if a hand pressed gently on her shoulder. A warmth, a knowing. And though no words were spoken, the answer arrived clearly. "No, child. You freed me." That is the essence of ancestral healing. It's invisible. It's lonely. And yet, it is powerful beyond measure. If you have ever found yourself in the middle of a room full of people you're related to, and still felt like you were on another planet, this is why. If you've ever held back your truth out of fear of being too different, you are likely carrying the flame of ancestral transformation. Your feeling of not belonging is not a flaw. It is a signal. You were not born to belong. You were born to awaken, to question, to grieve, to forgive, to rise. This dissonance you've carried is spiritual data. You come from lineages where wounds went unspoken, secrets were buried, and roles were rigid. Perhaps the men in your family were never allowed to cry. Perhaps the women were never allowed to want. Perhaps someone long ago gave up their dream to survive, and that heartbreak became coded into the DNA you now carry. But here you are, Sagittarius, burning with the truth that things can be different, that they must be. And this knowing may have made you feel like a misfit. But in truth, you are the miracle they never had. So many of us think that ancestral healing is about rituals and ceremonies, and those can be beautiful. But sometimes ancestral healing is you standing in the mirror and saying, I don't have to become what hurt me. It is you walking away from a toxic relationship because you believe you're worthy of more. It is you choosing not to hit your child when you were beaten. It is you learning how to speak love in a family that only knew silence. It is you daring to be soft when hardness was the only protection your bloodline ever knew. Sagittarius, your soul chose this, not as punishment, but as purpose. You are the one your ancestors prayed for, even if they didn't have the words for that prayer. You are the answer to generations of longing. And yes, that comes with weight, but it also comes with a sacred power. Because once you realize that the feeling of not belonging was never about rejection, but about redirection, everything changes. You are not here to fit in. You are here to light the way. And even if no one around you understands yet, your ancestors do. The ones whose names you may not know. The ones whose faces you've never seen. They are walking beside you. They are gathering every act of courage you've made. The decisions that cost you comfort but brought you truth. And they are placing them like stones along a new path. One that future generations will walk with more ease because you chose to walk it first. That's what transformation looks like. And Sagittarius, it always starts with someone who dares to say, this ends with me. Gate 2. The strange dreams and subtle feelings. Your ancestors are reaching for you. Sagittarius, not all communication happens in words. Some of the most profound conversations in your life unfold in silence. In symbols, in sensations, in dreams that linger long after you've woken up. If you've recently had recurring dreams that feel strange but familiar, moments of déjà vu that send shivers down your spine, or even sudden emotional waves you can't trace to anything in your waking life, you may be experiencing ancestral contact. These are not random. They are whispers from beyond, reaching for your spirit through the only doorways left open, your subconscious and your soul's sensitivity. Many Sagittarius cycle breakers report periods of increased vivid dreaming, especially during life transitions or after making powerful emotional decisions. These dreams often feature family members, old houses, lands that feel ancient, or symbols like keys, doors, rivers, fire. And although you may wake up with confusion or heaviness, the underlying message is often the same. We are with you. We see what you're doing. Keep going. Let me share a story. Luca, a Sagittarius man in his 30s, had been in therapy for years, struggling to break free from a legacy of addiction that had run through both sides of his family. After finally committing to sobriety, he began to have a recurring dream. He was walking through an abandoned house, and at the end of the hallway stood an old woman with silver hair and strong eyes, holding a candle. She never spoke. She only nodded, and he would wake up crying without understanding why. One day, while cleaning out his mother's attic, he found a faded photograph. It was the woman, his great-grandmother, a woman he'd never met, a woman who had taken her own life during a time when mental illness was considered shameful. For Luca, that dream became sacred. It wasn't just his imagination. It was her way of saying, you are healing what I couldn't name. This is the mystery of ancestral connection. When we begin to shift the energy of an old lineage, the spirits of those who came before often step forward, not to haunt us but to honor us. They want to be seen, remembered, released. They want to tell you, you're not doing this alone. So if lately, Sagittarius, you've been having dreams that bring up old wounds or forgotten places, if you've heard your name whispered when no one's there, or seen repeated numbers and signs like 111, 444, birds appearing at strange moments, flickering lights, the scent of perfume with no source, take a deep breath. Don't dismiss it. The veil between worlds thins when the soul is ready. And your soul? It's been listening more deeply than ever before. Another woman I spoke with, named Mireille, shared how after her father's death, she kept dreaming of walking through a field at sunset. Each time the wind would whisper words she couldn't quite hear. But one night she stopped in the dream and whispered back, "What do you want me to know?" The wind calmed. A tree appeared in front of her with a single word carved into the trunk, "Forgive." She woke up weeping. That was the moment she finally wrote the letter to her estranged brother, the one she'd stopped speaking to for 5 years. 2 weeks later he called her. Something had shifted. When she told him about the dream, he admitted he'd been having dreams of their childhood home at the exact same time. Coincidence? Or spirit working through both of them at once? Sagittarius, your lineage is not separate from your life. Whether you're conscious of it or not, your ancestors are invested in your evolution. When you cry over things you can't explain, when your body reacts before your mind understands, pause. Listen. Sometimes the grief you carry is older than your own story. Sometimes your anxiety is ancestral memory. But here's the beauty. The moment you become conscious of it, you begin to release it. And in that release you free not only yourself but them too. Your openness is your gift. Your dreams are your bridge. Your sensitivity is your strength. Not everyone is ready to receive these messages, but you are. That's why they're coming now. Because you're strong enough to hold them. Because your path has brought you to a place of remembering, not just who you are, but who they were. And when the messages come, whether in dreams, in sudden emotion, in the gentle pressure on your shoulder when no one's around, receive them with reverence. You don't have to figure it all out. Just acknowledge them. Light a candle. Speak their names. Thank them. Invite them to guide you with love and clarity. Because the truth is they already are. You are not crazy. You are connected. You are not imagining things. You are remembering. And they are watching, waiting, whispering. Keep going, child. You are doing what we could not. You are making us proud. Gate 3. The message from beyond. You have gone further than we ever could. Sagittarius, if you've ever paused during a moment of triumph or clarity and felt the overwhelming sensation that someone was proud of you, though no one stood in the room, if you've ever heard an inner voice whisper, "You're doing it, keep going." When no one was physically there to say it, what you felt wasn't imaginary. It was real. It was ancestral. There is a message that many cycle breakers eventually receive, not always in words but in a deep, cellular knowing. You have gone further than we ever could. It is a message of awe, of pride, of recognition. It is the spirits of those who came before acknowledging the soul-expanding journey you've undertaken in this lifetime. Because what you're doing isn't just for yourself. It is for them too. Imagine a man named Elias, a Sagittarius with an unshakable sense of right and wrong. Elias grew up in a family where silence was survival. His father never spoke of his own childhood, only carried a permanent shadow in his eyes. His mother seemed always on the edge of tears but never explained why. Elias, as a child, couldn't understand the tension that haunted their home, the invisible weight that never lifted. But as he grew older, he began to notice patterns, how emotional needs were ignored, how truth was avoided, how trauma was inherited not through stories but through behaviors, reactions, fears. He chose a different path: therapy, meditation, journaling, spiritual work. And one night, after years of inner excavation, he had a dream where he stood on a hilltop surrounded by stars. In the distance stood 3 figures. He couldn't see their faces, but he knew in his soul they were his ancestors. One of them stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. No words were spoken, but the feeling that surged through him was undeniable. You are the one we've waited for. You are doing what we couldn't finish. You are free. Sagittarius, this is what happens when you break an ancestral chain. The silence you shatter reverberates across dimensions. The forgiveness you offer heals not only your heart, but the hearts that never had the chance to speak. The choices you make in this life, choosing love over fear, honesty over convenience, healing over avoidance, those choices echo across generations. They free the souls who carried pain so long they forgot what peace felt like. And even though this work can be lonely, you are not alone in doing it. You are held by unseen hands. You are guided by wisdom you carry in your blood. You are accompanied by ancestors who may have failed, fallen, given up, but who now walk beside you with reverence, grateful that someone finally had the courage to turn toward the wound and tend it. The message you're receiving now may come through signs or dreams, or simply a quiet shift in how you see your family. You may look at old photos and feel a tenderness rise up, a love that isn't rooted in what they gave you, but in what you now understand they couldn't. You may suddenly recognize the strength it took for them just to survive. And in that recognition, something beautiful happens. Judgment dissolves, blame softens, and compassion begins to bloom. Because now, you are no longer a child trying to understand why things were broken. You are the adult with the power to rebuild something better. This is the sacred legacy of Sagittarius. To travel further, love harder, and see more deeply than those who came before. To turn pain into wisdom, and wisdom into freedom. Your ancestors may have built the foundation, but you are building the temple. And they know it. They see how far you've come, not just physically but emotionally, spiritually. And they're not asking you to carry their regret. They're asking you to carry their hope. The hope that one day, someone in the family would rise and say, enough. The hope that someone would look at the pattern and say, this doesn't end with me, it ends with me. The hope that someone would dare to dream new dreams and live a life not in reaction to the past, but in devotion to the future. That someone is you. So the next time you feel discouraged, the next time you wonder if the path of healing is worth it, remember this: your ancestors are not asking for perfection. They are asking for your presence. They are not asking you to save them. They are thanking you for saving yourself. And they are saying, with every ounce of love they couldn't express in life, you have gone further than we ever could. And we are so, so proud. Gate 4. Continuing forward with love, gratitude, and the sacred awareness of your soul's mission. Sagittarius, now that you know deep in your bones that your journey is not just personal but ancestral, something changes. You walk differently. You speak more carefully. You listen with your heart wide open. Because what you carry now is not just healing. It's sacred purpose. This is the moment where the path ahead no longer feels accidental or random. This is the chapter where you become the ancestor you wish you had. To walk in awareness is to live in reverence. Not fear, not pressure, but presence. You begin to realize that even the smallest act of love, offering forgiveness, speaking your truth, choosing rest over burnout, staying present in hard conversations, is a thread woven into the larger tapestry of healing. And each time you make a choice that reflects the future you're building, instead of the past you inherited, you shift the frequency of your entire bloodline. Consider a young Sagittarius woman named Layla. She grew up in a home where ambition was everything, where love was conditional, and where softness was punished. Her grandmother had been the first woman in the family to get a college degree, but it came at the cost of her joy. She worked until her body collapsed, never allowing herself to feel anything. Her mother too measured her worth by achievement and passed down that same invisible demand to Layla. Do more, be more, never slow down. And so for years Layla excelled. Straight A's, high-paying job, external success. But inside she was unraveling. It wasn't until she found herself lying awake one night, heart racing, feeling hollow and on the verge of tears for no reason, that she realized this wasn't living. It was surviving someone else's unfinished story. The next day she quit her job. Not out of recklessness but out of reverence. She needed to find out who she was without all the noise. The healing didn't happen overnight. But with time and therapy and deep inner work, Layla learned to be still. To cry. To laugh without guilt. To rest. To soften. And most of all, to love herself not for what she did but for simply being. Today, Layla runs a retreat center that helps other women remember who they are beneath the pressure. On her altar, she keeps a photograph of her grandmother. Sometimes when the wind moves through the trees outside, she swears she can hear her say, "You are free now, so I am too." Sagittarius, this is what it means to live your soul's mission. Not to carry the weight of the world but to transmute it. To take what was once passed down as pain and reshape it into love. To hold the sacred duality of knowing you come from deep, complicated roots, and yet you are not bound by them. You are rooted, but you are also rising. There will still be days when it feels like too much. Days when the silence is heavy, when the work is exhausting, when the old stories try to pull you back. But even then, remember this. Every time you choose truth, you are breaking a chain. Every time you love yourself in ways they never could, you are rewriting the script. Every time you say, "This ends with me," you send a wave of freedom back through time, touching all the hearts who came before you. Your ancestors do not need perfection from you. They need your permission to be free, to be seen, to be named, to be remembered with compassion rather than pain. Light a candle. Speak their names if you know them. If you don't, speak from your heart anyway. Because your voice now carries their longing, their strength, their hopes. And your path is their liberation. The spiritual mission of Sagittarius has always been to expand, to explore, to evolve. But this chapter is not about traveling outward. It's about journeying inward, into your lineage, into your truth, into the sacred fire that burns in your soul and says, I am not here to suffer in silence. I am here to transform. I am here to love. I am here to live a life that feels like light. And so you walk forward, not alone, but surrounded by those who finally see what you've done, with love, with gratitude, and with the sacred awareness that every choice you make in this life is echoing into eternity. Sagittarius, the chain ends with you, and something far more beautiful begins. Conclusion. You are the answer to an ancestral prayer. Sagittarius, now that you've walked through the gates of memory, of spirit, of truth and transformation, you know that your pain was never meaningless, that your journey has never been a detour, that your soul chose this path for a reason. You are not the beginning of the story, but you are the one rewriting its ending. You are the chapter they never got to live. You are the breath they held in. You are the light they never reached, shining now with everything they once dreamed of becoming. And maybe at times you felt alone in this work. Maybe you've wondered why your road has been filled with so many shadows, so many stops and starts, so much unraveling. But hear this clearly, deeply, with the full power of your heart. You were never alone. You were never forgotten. You have always been guided, by hands you couldn't see, by love you didn't always recognize, by spirits who never stopped believing in you. The ancestors whose chains you've broken do not sit in silence. They rise now, in the hush between your thoughts, in the heat in your chest when you speak your truth, in the tear that falls when you forgive someone who couldn't give you what you needed, in the freedom you now live that once seemed impossible. They rise in you. So take this moment, Sagittarius, to honor yourself, to honor the courage it takes to do this kind of soul work, to love deeply, to heal consciously, to break patterns not from bitterness but from love. You are the healing your lineage has been waiting for. And if this message found you, if it stirred something ancient and sacred in your heart, then let it be a sign. You are right on time. You are held. You are home. If this touched your spirit in any way, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel Zodiac Wisdom. Together, we're not just reading stars, we are becoming the light.